Good day and welcome to the Frontline Chatter podcast. My name is Jarian Gibson, and this is our first official podcast as we moved under the world of EUC. And with that being said as well, I have two co-hosts on here with me today. I have Shawn Massey and Stephen Wagner. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, Jarian. How are you?
Doing good. How about you, Stephen?
I'm excited that this is the first podcast for World of EUC.
Yeah, very excited today. And we have someone on who was an early guest of Frontline Chatter while we were independent still back in the day. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Shawn Bass. So happy to have Shawn Bass on with us today. It's kind of been a roller coaster couple weeks for him as he's now newly joined Citrix. And I think he's still getting acclimated to everything. So how you doing today, Shawn?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's good to be back. As you said, kind of full circle from the very early days with you and Andy to where it is now. And it's great to see that it's under a World of EUC now, which is gaining a lot of steam as a kind of independent group trying to push the EUC industry forward. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. Great to have you. And speaking of full circle, let's kind of talk about your impressive career. So you've been a consultant. You were one of the OG CTPs in the group. Then you've gone into VMware. You were an advisor for a couple of companies, and like I said, full circle. Now you're at Citrix / Cloud Software Group. So let's kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so I've been in the EUC space now, and it pains me to say this, for 30 years because it makes me realize just how old I am. But yeah, I got my start really consulting on Citrix products in the early 90s. I began with Citrix WinView, which was certainly not their first product. Multi-user was the first, but WinView is the one where they really started getting customer traction. And then not long after WinView, they pivoted to WinFrame, and that's where things really went berserk in terms of my consulting career and how many jobs we were doing. I started out working for a Citrix Platinum reseller in the Chicago area that no longer exists today. But ironically, that's where I first ran into Ron Oglesby. Ron and I worked at the same company for a couple of overlapping years and did consulting with that partner for about 3 or 4 years. Then I split off on my own, ran my own consulting gig for 16 years, mostly doing design and architecture of large scale Zen app, Zen desktop, app virtualization. I did a lot of Softricity SoftGrid, which later became AppV. And some ThinApp and a few other app virtualization solutions. Then I got involved in mobility management, did some MDM projects. And then it was around that time that I decided I wanted to get out of consulting and join a software vendor. And I made that decision for 2 reasons. One, because I felt like for all the years I was a CTP and Microsoft MVP and providing feedback to these companies, a lot of times I was providing feedback where it's like, oh, you did A when you really should have done B. And I kept thinking, like, if I could just go to those vendors, I could fix it. And then I never have to have that problem, right? And of course, it doesn't quite work that easily. When you get in the inside, it's never as simple as you'd like to think that you can make change. There's always, I don't want to say decision by committee, but it's not like it's your sole decision to do certain things. So it's a little more challenging than you would think. But the other reason why I wanted to join a software vendor is I kind of got burnt out of consulting. Like when you run a small consultancy, you're always, and Stephen's shaking his head right now, knowing exactly what I'm about to say. You never want to turn a job down. You're like, oh, sure, I can do that this weekend, and I'll do it from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. this evening. Like, yeah, no problem. And I was getting burnt out of doing that, like way too many hours. And I thought to myself, like, hey, if I just go work for a vendor, then I can get some work-life balance and it'll all be better. And I can tell you that did not happen. That did not work the way I thought it was going to work. I think I worked more hours when I was at VMware, and I definitely traveled way more hours when I was at VMware than when I was an independent consultant. So, but yeah, and, to answer your question, full circle back at Citrix, I was at VMware for 8.5 years. And I think that shocked and upset a lot of people. Like there were a couple of CTPs that kind of disowned me after leaving the CTP and MVP programs and joining VMware. But, I try to tell people life is short, it's a job, get over it, and I shared the same thing when I met with a bunch of the Citrix sales teams, because I talked with them in my first couple of weeks about a lot of accounts that we had won to VMware EUC from Citrix. And my message to all the salespeople was, hey, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like I was doing my job. That's what I was expected to do. And but I'm excited to be at Citrix now because I really think, if I look at Citrix from 2014 when I joined VMware up until around 2021, they were going through some tough times, both with leadership turnover, with product strategy, with acquisitions. There was a lot of difficult things happening at Citrix, and VMware was able to capitalize on a lot of that because of some of the misfires that were happening at Citrix. But I started saying, even when I was at VMware internally, that Citrix kind of got their mojo back around 2021. They started really focusing on delivering the features customers care about. Of course, the private equity takeover came in 2022, and there was a lot of turmoil as a result of that. But I feel like the company that emerged out of that is so much stronger and leaner and hungrier than they've ever been in the past. And I think Citrix is in a position now, I joined them in 2024 because I feel like they're finally in a position where they're the healthiest from an external point of view, from a customer point of view, and a strategy point of view. They're the healthiest they've been in probably 10 years at least. So I'm pretty excited to see what we can accomplish in the next couple of years, given this new kind of focus and growth strategy.
I kind of chuckle too about the whole independent and the going to the vendor side, because you actually helped me get started on my independent side. And then I think we talked a while about going, on the vendor side, and then I ended up joining Nutanix years later. So yeah. I definitely understand that whole independent and the vendor and the work-life balance. And I can say where I'm at now, it's a lot better than when I was independent. So that's a little bit of a change.
Yeah, I probably should have given you some of those customers with a little bit of warning, like, hey, careful what you're getting yourself into. But I figured I'm like, he'll figure it out.
Yeah, they were fun. No problems there. It was all good. So,
you said as you've said, you were at VMware for 8.5 years, and it kind of took a lot of people by surprise when in 2023 you announced that you were leaving VMware. But then there was some time between when you left VMware and just recently when you joined Citrix. So could you tell us what you'd been up to in that time? What sort of things were you doing? Was there anything you're working on, or fun projects you had, et cetera?
Yeah, so I definitely did take a long sabbatical. I initially anticipated it would be like 3 to 6 months, and then I really enjoyed it too much and decided to make it 6 months. And then by that point in time, it was like September, October. I'm like, I don't really want to start looking for something new now. Like maybe I'll just wait till the end of the year and then pick it up in the beginning of the year. And so, 3 months became 6, became 9, and I enjoyed the time off. I mean, my wife and I spent a ton of time traveling together, which we hadn't done really much of in the last 8.5 years that I was at VMware, because I was always traveling for work, and I didn't want to then go travel with family when I had free time. I'd rather just be at home. So we actually took quite a bit of time and traveled in the Caribbean, spent some time in Mexico. We had our 25th wedding anniversary, spent time in Rome for about 10 days. And we really just kind of enjoyed ourselves and got reacclimated to being together again and me not being gone all the time. So it was a good break. Near the end of the year of 2023, I did start advising 2 startups. One of them is named Sonnet.io, and one of them is named Amplifier Security. Sonnet, I actually had to step down as an advisor because they have quite a bit of overlap with CSG and Citrix. So, I wish those guys the best of luck, and I think they've got a bright future, but I couldn't stay as an advisor to them because of the conflict. I am still advising Amplifier Security, and they're doing very well. I'm very excited for them. But I did those 2 startup advisory things, and then I knew that I was still probably going to go back to full-time somewhere in EUC. It was just a matter of kind of where that was going to be. And to be honest, I've known Sridhar for over 20 years, so I was very, very comfortable, chatting with him about what's next. And he was in pursuit of me for probably a good 10 months prior to me actually joining CSG. It was just a situation of we had to get everything lined up and contracts and all those kind of things. But I kind of had a pretty good feeling I may end up there for about 6 months before it actually happened. it just took time to work through everything.
Cool. So first, I want to say congratulations on your 25th wedding anniversary.
Yes,
That's
congrats.
an accomplishment,
Congrats.
especially for somebody who's in a role where they're traveling all the time.
Well, it's funny. It's funny, Shawn, because even though I said my wife and I really enjoyed our time together, I'll also share that after having been on the road so much and then being home 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, my wife started wondering, like, when's your next business trip? Like, do you have to go anywhere anytime soon? So yes, I think we made 25 years because I traveled so much.
So
it's the secret. It's a secret to a long marriage. Just make sure you're gone a lot.
Travel all the time, right?
Yes.
My wife would probably disagree with that, but different dynamics there. But I just wanted to also add on that topic when you said you're like, oh, I thought it was going to be 3 to 6 months, and then I'd start looking, but I enjoyed it too much. About a month and a half ago, my wife and I were on our vacation for our 15th anniversary, and
Congrats.
she's like, I'm not comfortable with you taking with your decision to leave VMware, and I'm worried you're going to enjoy it too much. And so far, she's turning out to be right.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. It is really hard, honestly. Like once you kind of get in that mode of having the free time and be able to do what you want to do with your free time, It is tough to go back into full time. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But I did realize there's no way I could retire right now, both because I don't feel financially comfortable enough, and I don't think I'm in a position where I could just stop working, in end user computer and technology. I love it too much. I don't think I could see myself stopping that anytime soon. Now, maybe 7-10 years in the future is a different story, but I don't feel like I could do it now.
See, one thing too, you said you guys kind of got comfortable for a little bit. That's why when I transitioned from consultant to working for a vendor, I did not do that, because I knew if I did that, I'd be in the same situation where I got too comfortable and I probably would have started doing something else. So
yeah, exactly. It is tough, once you kind of get used to having time to yourself, it's hard.
So now jumping back into the hustle, Shawn, what can you tell us about your new role with Citrix and CSG as a VP and CTO? How's it been getting up to speed, and what are you looking forward to working on in the future?
So it definitely has been drinking from the fire hose, and I think that's for a number of different reasons. One, because I'm having to meet a whole new bunch of people. Like obviously, I knew a bunch of the BU leadership from previous collaborations on the CTP side and others. But a lot of the go-to-market teams are pretty new to me. So I'm getting a lot of one-on-ones and meetings and those types of things. I did attend our customer advisory board in London and in Fort Lauderdale. We run the London one for our EMEA partners, our EMEA customers, and the one in Fort Lauderdale is for our Americas customers. And got to meet a lot of our customers there and learn about what they're doing with our technology and where they're headed in the future. So all of that was good. I've been doing a pretty large amount of travel, which I don't know if it's going to stay that way or if it's going to taper down or what's going to happen. But I've been doing a substantial amount of travel, which is making things a little challenging because I have a day job and projects to do that. When you're on the road, it's hard to get your project work done if you're busy and all day meetings. And so that's been a little challenging. I've got to find the right balance for that. But I would say in general, it's been good. I mean, the thing that's been nice for me is everyone's been very welcoming and receptive and very happy to have me here. I think a lot of the people at Citrix either have known me personally over the years or know of me from work that I've done in the EUC space. And everyone's been super happy to have me here and have my experience. And there's really been a lot of I'll just say like open arms and open ears of people saying like, hey, tell us about the state of EUC. Tell us where you think things are headed. Give us some advice on what we should do for this strategy, for this product, whatever. So it's been a pretty welcome reception, I'd say, across the board, whether it's product management, engineering, or go to market. It's been a great experience these last probably 6 or 7 weeks.
Cool. So we're going to switch up the order here a little bit. Now, at the beginning, Shawn, when you were telling us about your long and distinguished career, you took us through a number of the different roles that you had as, as a consultant, as a self-employed consultant, working for vendors, and startup advisor. So taking all of these roles into account, what are some of the learnings that you're able to bring forward to your new role at Citrix and CSG?
Yeah. So I think, first and foremost, when I was an independent consultant, I was providing advice back to Citrix and Microsoft through the CTP and MVP programs respectively, where I was kind of articulating to them what I think their strategy and direction should be. And I think in a lot of cases, sometimes that information falls on deaf ears. Sometimes they listen. It's kind of a mixed bag. And when I was at VMware, I would say, in general, I was pretty successful at directing the business in certain different areas that I thought were important for us to invest in, whether it was product feature development that we needed to do, or guiding some of the PM teams on enterprise requirements that they may not be aware of if they hadn't spent enough time with enterprise customers. And I was able to shape a lot of the product features as well as the overall business unit sort of strategy. I would say at Citrix, it's still a little bit early days for me to tell how impactful some of that will be. But what I've been pretty happy with is how receptive most of the people have been about the direction and strategy of the business unit that I've been advising people on. It definitely seems like I'm getting a lot of reception to the ideas that I have, and I'm pretty excited. Having only been in 2 months so far, how much people are, I guess you'd say, giving me enough rope to hang myself on leading some initiatives. It's been a good experience. So I think the learnings that I would say is, I'd kind of been in this same role at VMware EUC and was allowed to kind of drive some initiatives there. And it seems like I'm going to have equal, if not substantially greater, direction and ability to influence the product roadmap at Citrix. So I'm pretty excited for that.
So speaking of Citrix and the roadmap and so forth, for several years, Citrix kind of came with a cloud first, sometimes cloud only message.
Yeah.
And since then, they have kind of pivoted back to a on-prem / hybrid message. We all know the technology is great, but also it seems like at times the messaging and packaging in general is kind of an issue. So what are your thoughts around those things?
Yeah, I think I think Citrix fell into what a lot of vendors fell into at that time, where there was almost a heightened pivot to cloud first or cloud only. And the reality is not every customer is ready to adopt a cloud first or cloud only approach. And I'm not even just speaking about like highly regulated industries. I'm just saying like some customers are just not accustomed to that type of OpEx led investment in their subscription type models. So I think what Citrix sort of pivoted back to is meet customers where they are and adapt to what they need. Now, I don't think there's any doubt that it is in the best interest of all software companies to get customers to take up cloud services, particularly for control plane purposes, because it enables a software vendor to deliver features much faster in a cloud control plane than it does to deliver it strictly in a shipped on-prem software product. But I think Citrix has reached kind of a happy medium where they do try to get customers into a cloud control plane model, but still let them run their assets on premises as long as they need to. But I do think, as time marches on, more and more customers are going to be moving those assets to the cloud. So I think, Citrix's direction was probably right, but maybe just off by some number of years in terms of the aggressiveness in which customers need to move to cloud. So I think the new strategy is good, which is to kind of meet customers where they are. I would say the other thing that I think has been helpful about Citrix is you've probably noticed that they've started to be able to kind of pivot the strategy of the company to offer solutions to customers beyond VDI and published apps. For a long time, Citrix was kind of viewed as the VDI only or published apps only technology vendor. And in some industries like financial services and healthcare, where you might have 70, 90, 100% usage on a virtual desktop or published app host, that certainly isn't the norm in the broad scope of industry. So having technologies that are accessible and useful to customers outside of that requirement, particularly if you're a customer that has use for maybe 20 to 30% of your population for VDI or published apps, but the other 70% doesn't have a use for it, then that kind of limits your future value to that customer. So some of the things that Citrix has done over the last couple of years is introduced the Citrix Enterprise Browser, which I think a lot of people still don't know is actually a enterprise browser that runs on the client device. It's not an RBI hosted on XenApp, published app, but it's analogous to an Island or Talon or Surf or Seraphic or one of those vendors. It's a full-featured enterprise browser to secure web and SaaS apps with DLP and malware protection and all those types of things. And that's something that's applicable to 100% of a customer's fleet, whether it's modern managed endpoints or legacy managed physical endpoints or VDI or SBC, like it's applicable everywhere. And as more and more apps move to web and SaaS, there may not be a play for those inside of VDI or terminal services, or you may need to think about a defense in depth strategy of how do we do DLP and security for our web and SaaS apps, even in the context of VDI or RDSH. And I think maybe we don't do a good enough job telling people that, hey, you can use the enterprise browser in your VDI or in your published apps to further provide your DLP security controls for your web and SaaS apps so that people aren't leaking sensitive confidential data out to their personal Dropbox and so on and so forth. Because in the world of VDI and SBC, a lot of customers today either don't have any DLP in place, or they're relying on a proxy-based security approach, which isn't always the best approach, or they're relying on legacy DLP, which not only can be not entirely effective for DLP security controls, but a lot of legacy DLP are actually huge consumers of resources in VDI and SBC environments. So trying to move to an environment that makes it easier to do your DLP controls for your web and SaaS apps, I think is a very good thing. And then you can also layer into that the secure private access capability that gives you zero trust network access that allows you to do conditional access and continuous authorization to your various different web and SaaS properties, as well as your on-premises client server apps that you may need to deliver to your users. So between those two technologies and Uber Agent, which Citrix acquired earlier this year, really starts to give you a set of offerings that you can position to customers for every one of their endpoints, whether it's virtual or physical, and really make Citrix a much more valuable company to all of their customer base, because now they are the way to deliver, I should say it's getting hard for me to remember that. We are the way to deliver secure access to any application on any device. So years in the past, Citrix would always say any, but it wasn't really any, it was virtual apps to any device, over any network. And now it's really any app to any device over any network.
Yeah, it did seem that physical was still a huge untapped resource for Citrix, and they've kind of pivoted to address that. And I just want to say that Uber Agent was a fantastic acquisition. I know, very jealous of the acquisition. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, it's something that we were looking at multiple times at VMware, and we're not able to do that. So it's good to see that Citrix was able to acquire vast limits, and I'm very excited to work together with Helga. I'm actually going to see him next week. I'm going to be in our Bangalore R&D site, so we're having some planning sessions about the roadmap for the product.
Nice. So shifting gears a little bit here. Like the last couple of years, there's been a massive shakeup in the EUC space and related spaces such as virtualization. What are your thoughts about everything going on as a whole with Citrix, with VMware, Broadcom, Omnissa, and all the new emerging vendors in the EUC and related spaces?
Yeah. So, with VMware being my former employer, I'm not going to say, a bunch of negative things about them. I had a great 8.5 years at VMware. And I think, with Broadcom taking over VMware, they're obviously going through a lot of things with their customer base where some customers are not happy with Broadcom's new focus, and some customers feeling like they're getting charged more money. I think that's a pretty typical, private equity model when a company's taken over. And I realize that Broadcom's not private equity, but they kind of operate in a similar model to how private equity operates. So I think there's going to be a lot of unhappy traditional VMware customers that are either going to move to the cloud and exit Broadcom, or they're going to move to somebody like Nutanix and exit Broadcom. There's going to be a lot of customers that stay because, frankly, VMware is a very sticky technology, especially if you've got it broadly deployed in your data center and you're using technologies like VRA and VRO and vSAN and NSX. Like, it becomes a very difficult platform to move off of. So I think Broadcom's going to enjoy a lot of customers that just are stuck and would not be able to move. I'm sure that many of them are figuring out contingency plans, but if you've got thousands of virtualized hosts, it's hard to make a move of a data center that size to anything and achieve it in any reasonable time frame. And by reasonable, I mean 3 to 5 years, not like 3 to 6 months. So that's challenging. In terms of EUC, I knew when I was at VMware that EUC was likely going to get spun out of VMware. I did want to stay through the Broadcom transaction, but frankly, things just kind of got a little too, shifted into cruise control or shifted into neutral for my tastes. And I was a bit more ambitious about wanting to grow and move the market. And I decided it was best for me to just move on and go do something different. So I resigned from VMware. I didn't take a package or get an offer to move out. I just decided it was time for me to move on. And, I wish all those guys the best of luck. I mean, I put a LinkedIn post out a couple of days ago when NISA was officially announced that they were spun out of Broadcom into KKR. I love the people that I work with there, and I really do wish them all the best. Obviously, I'm competing with them now, so maybe I don't wish them as much luck, but I do wish them the best. I hope that everyone there has a bright future and has a lot of success in the new organization. Shifting to kind of what happened to Citrix during the private equity ownership, like there were a lot of layoffs, as I'm sure many of you know, because a bunch of people that work at Citrix. And I don't want to make light of the horrible situations of all the people that lost their jobs, but I think it was a necessary thing that had to be done as part of refocusing the company on their top 3,500 customers and not going after new logos and new customers. And as I said earlier, I think Citrix has emerged as a much stronger, hungrier, growth-focused company as a result of it. I suspect, Omnissa may go through some of that in their future as well, but I don't have a crystal ball to know exactly what's happening with Omnissa and what their growth strategy is. So I won't comment one way or the other on what's going to happen there because I frankly, I don't know. I haven't really kept in touch with a lot of the Omnissa people for obvious reasons now that I'm working for a competitor.
Yeah, it does seem like with the Omnissa being spun out, they can be open up to more things than just VMware now. So that seems like a very good thing for them.
Yeah,
and I think that will help them in some ways, and it may also hurt them in other ways. I mean, EUC was always a separate business from the core of VMware. So you had like an EUC sales team, and then you had your core VMware sales team. And while you'd like to think that those sales teams are always complementary, sometimes they do kind of fight with one another internally when there's an ELA renewal and they're trying to figure out what's going to fit in the customer's budget. As you would expect, sometimes things get pushed out. So in some ways, I think Omnissa being on their own, they're not going to have some of that competition with the internal core team. On the other hand, they're also not going to have the benefit of the VMware brand to help them in deals. So they're going to have to fend for themselves, which could present some challenges. So I think time will tell how it works out, but I could see both positive and negative approaches with them being an independent company.
Yeah, agree. Definitely makes sense. So putting on your crystal ball hat here, where do you see the EUC space going as a whole, as far as VDI, app delivery, AI? You mentioned security and physical earlier. Any other things you want to share about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think in general, and I talked about this earlier, I think there will be a continued pivot to more and more workloads in the cloud that I think it'll continue to accelerate. So if you've looked at some of the the DAS growth numbers from the analyst firms. And, analysts can sometimes be wrong and can often be wrong, but I think the growth for DAS is definitely far greater than the growth for on-prem VDI market, where on-prem might be call it anywhere between 3 to 8%, depending on what year you look at it. Whereas DAS is in the 20, 30+% CAGR. So DAS will continue to grow and workloads will continue to shift to cloud. I think the AI situation is going to present an interesting challenge because, a lot of the inferencing today is done with the use of GPUs or NPUs. And, in the VDI space, GPUs are still not super prevalent in a lot of workloads, and NPUs are non-existent in VDI workloads. So I think it'll present a little bit of an interesting picture of how AI tools get introduced into VDI and SBC estates. And you may see more of a movement to, well, we just need, modern managed endpoints that have an NPU and we can do all of our stuff on there. But I think that's also going to depend on how much people really want to go after on device, AI inferencing versus sending things off to the cloud, which is certainly far easier to do and would be more applicable to your VDI and SBC workloads. But the whole AI circumstance right now, I think there's still a lot of hype in AI in that, a lot of customers are using it. A lot of people are talking about the benefit they're getting out of it. But the hype of AI is 10 times what the real productive value is today. And I think that there will be a little bit of a retraction of that in the coming years where people will say like, hey, we spent, billions of dollars on GPUs and models and paying for subscription services, and maybe it hasn't yielded the value that we thought it was going to yield. But I think there will be a happy medium. So it's kind of like the Gartner hype cycle thing. Like there will be this plateau of productivity that emerges at some point in time where people will figure out really where the AI tools fit the need. So I think there'll be growth there for sure. But I don't think it's going to be as widespread as the hype is currently serving that it's going to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of the AI stuff, especially from EUC space, if it's going to be like in a VDI or app session, is going to be offloaded to the cloud somewhere, like Copilot or OpenAI, one of those things. But one thing I just thought about is I wonder if they were doing anything in session with AI, and if the device had an NPU that they're accessing from it, any offload could be done. Kind of today, like we offload Teams or do like BCR type things. I wonder if that's going to be a state of any kind of future.
Well,
ESC
at the moment,
solution.
there is no virtualized NPU in most of the modern hypervisors. I'm sure there will be, because it'll be a necessity at some point in time for generic, virtualization to be able to do AI on a VM. So I'm sure that will be coming in the near future. Whether or not that gets passed through to a VM for a VDI purpose, or whether we do some type of a network NPU offload, like NVIDIA had some of their GPU offload chassis. I think it remains to be seen, but there's no doubt that there will be a need at some point in time for NPU power into virtualized VMs. And I suspect it will flow through to the VDI estate shortly thereafter. The other thing we didn't really touch on, but I think is going to be pretty big in the coming years, is a much stronger investment in zero trust network access. And that's a terminology that I think has been way overblown by a lot of vendors in this space. But the underpinnings of what makes up zero trust network access, customers are doing today. Has it been to the extreme that a lot of people were predicting 10 years ago, where like VPNs will be dead? Certainly not. There's still tons of corporations using VPNs. But the thing about zero trust that I always try to remind people is like, zero trust is a journey. It's not like a switch you flip that you weren't zero trust before and now you're zero trust. It's about analyzing all of your applications, identifying which of them are using modern authentication protocols, and instituting, microsegment tunnels to those things that you can modernize. And if there's still things that are legacy, there's nothing wrong with kind of, I don't want to say putting those in a corner, but like serving up your legacy apps off of server-based computing or VDI, modernizing everything else. And then as those applications go away or get replaced, you replace them with a modern auth capable application. But server-based computing and VDI is a great technology to sort of sandbox those applications, get them off device, get their data centralized in a way that's not going to get compromised on a risky device. And then as you can modernize and replace those, you do that. But, VDI and server-based computing can be a key part of zero trust network access to help you sandbox those applications and get them off your devices while you've got some legacy things that you're dealing with, and modernize everything else. So I think it plays a really important role in zero trust.
Yeah, using app and desktop delivery was kind of zero trust before zero trust became a thing. Especially when you lock it down, turn clipboard off, all those features are locked down.
It only addresses like a small part of zero trust, because a lot of the VDI estate that's out there doesn't do continuous authorization. Like a lot of the technologies people have implemented for VPNs or for remote access gateways is more like a fire it at logon and evaluate some posture and then permit it. But very few technologies in the VDI or SBC space actually do continuous authorization where they're evaluating posture constantly and then reacting. But that's an area that is continually evolving, and we're doing some things in that space. And I think you're going to continue to see more investment there in the EUC industry as a whole.
All right. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here too now. You mentioned, you were one of the original CTPs, part of the OG group. When you were at VMware, you were a huge advocate of the VMware vExpert program, and you helped create the precursor to today's Omnissa program, as the EUC Champions program. So how do you feel about the current state of the EUC community? Do you have a plan for a community at Citrix? And where would you like to see the community go? And by the way, this is not a leading question considering you are on an EUC community podcast, but So what are your thoughts about community in general?
So I think it's a fair question. And I think everything that has gone on with Citrix in the course of the last 2 years, as part of the go private operation, there certainly have been a lot of changes at Citrix with respect to CUGC. Even before that, Synergy went away as kind of the user conference and have been replaced by regional events. It's tough. I think, community is extremely valuable and extremely important to me, but I'm not the only person making business decisions about community. I would say this, I think the general community for Citrix and Microsoft and VMware are very different today than what they were probably 10 years ago. And I think all of the vendors have invested less today than they did in prior years. I don't think that's a reflection on the fact that community isn't important. I think it's just a reflection on a lot of times the companies don't have the right KPIs to be able to articulate what the community does for them or how it improves their bottom line. And so I think without having those KPIs, it becomes very hard for them to justify the expenses that go into those programs. To answer your question in terms of my personal opinions on both, I'll say community as part of the broader CUGC, and obviously World of EUC is its own kind of community now, and the CTP and CTA program, I care about those programs very much. I don't directly control any of those programs at Citrix, although I'm getting heavily involved in the CTP and CTA programs, and I'm taking a key role in our Customer Connect events, and I'm trying to get more plugged into CUGC as we start figuring out how to kind of reshape that program going forward. So I'm working very closely with our community leads like Kimberly to try to figure out how we shape those investments in the future. I can't make any promises because obviously some of these things aren't entirely up to me. I can try to influence them. I can push in a certain direction, but at the end of the day, I've got bosses like everyone else does, and I've got to be able to make the case on why we invest in certain areas, and most importantly, what's the return on investment. And I think we're going to have to get, as an industry, a lot better at articulating what the ROI is and what the KPIs are that are helpful to the business, because if we can't do that, it's impossible to justify continued investment.
Right.
All right. So I do have, sorry, Stephen, I didn't mean to step over you. I was actually just trying to type that message in. I do have one quick follow-up on community. And you're one of the few people, I think, in the greater EUC community that's kind of lived in all the different silos, right? You've been in the Citrix silo, you've been in the VMware silo, you've been in the Microsoft silo. What is your perspective on trying to blend those a little bit? Because it seems like you have a column of Citrix people who only interact with Citrix people. You have a column of Microsoft people who, mainly live in the Microsoft world. The former VMware Omnissa people kind of live in their world. Yeah. And yet underneath it all, it's a lot of the same technologies. It's Active Directory, it's Windows. We have a lot of the same problems. And yes, this is a little bit of a leading question now, but what are your thoughts on getting people to, break those silos?
Wow, that is a loaded question. I would say if I was to look at the relationships of the companies, it might make it a little bit easier in that, Citrix and Microsoft have enjoyed a very close collaboration and partnership for, 25 plus years. I think it's easier to make associations and distinctions between Citrix and Microsoft than it is maybe between Microsoft and VMware or between VMware or Omnissa and Citrix, because I think each one of those angles looks harder and harder to articulate how partnership could happen. When I went into VMware in 2014, I was kind of surprised to learn from a lot of the product management folks that there was no Microsoft relationship, at least from like product manager to product manager. There was no joint product planning. There was no sharing of roadmap or what they were working on. So when I got into VMware, this was even before I was CTO, one of the first things I started trying to figure out was how to build a relationship with Microsoft, given that a whole bunch of our VMware product, at least on the Horizon side, was directly built on top of a Microsoft OS with Microsoft APIs for RDS and other things. So I actually started driving the partnership with Scott Manchester at Microsoft, who at the time was fairly new. Like Scott and I didn't overlap in MVP because he had just taken over the RDS MVP group from his predecessor. And so I didn't really have a lot of relationship with him, but we knew each other from online and we reached out and we kind of forged a friendship. And we started the very first, we took a trip up to Redmond and met with their team. And then we set up a regular cadence of PM to PM roadmap sharing and strategy sharing. And that yielded a lot of dividends. I mean, our Skype for Business offload that was built, I'm literally the person that signed on the dotted line to that partnership with the Skype for Business team. Later on, it became a Teams effort for Teams offload. We did a partnership on our AVD and Windows 365, and we had a partnership on SCCM and Intune coexistence, which unfortunately later fell apart for political reasons. But all those things kind of bared fruit because we put the effort into growing that partnership. And I say we because even though I started that at VMware, there were tons of people in product management that got behind it and invested their time and effort into maturing that relationship. And it paid a ton of dividends. So I think it's easier to think of like, how do Citrix and Microsoft collaborate? How do VMware or now Omnissa and Microsoft collaborate? How do Citrix and Omnissa people collaborate? I don't know there's much room for that, honestly, just because there's so much direct overlap and compete. Whereas at least with Microsoft, there's a build on top of AVD and Win365, but there isn't really a build on top of between Omnissa and Citrix. That's just straight up competition. So I don't really see much opportunity there to solve for that.
Yeah. So just taking a step back, just to jump back on the topic of community. So with EUC always being a space that's in transition, and the way that people share information is changing all the time, what advice would you give to someone who's new to the EUC community?
Yeah, that's tough because the advice I would have given them, 10 to 15 years ago was like start a blog, which nobody cares about blogs anymore. And get some time like presenting at EUC industry conferences. And even that is a little challenging because there really aren't a lot of EUC industry conferences anymore. I mean, there's Microsoft TechEd still, well, whatever they call TechEd now. Ignite is, I think TechEd became Ignite, right? So there's Ignite. There's and that's somewhat industry independent, at least from the EUC vendors that are out there outside of Microsoft. Like you'll have Citrix people and VMware people going to Ignite. There really isn't industry independent conferences out there anymore outside of like E2E in Europe. And of course, E2E does events in North America and Asia as well, but mostly they're known for their European events. And then obviously World of EUC kind of being an independent community now. In some ways, those are really the only two kind of independent community things outside of maybe iGel Disrupt, which is still kind of a vendor neutral, point of view. So I would say, get involved in some of those conferences, try to do some public presentation. You definitely learn a lot about yourself when you start doing public presentations. My first public presentation in 2005 was terrible. I attended Jarian's first public presentation.
That's why I'm laughing.
It was terrible. I think between Shane and Jarian, they were tag teaming to take breaths before the next person would go up and talk 400 words. But the point is, those are growing experiences. And what's amazing about that is I had never done a public presentation where immediately after that, someone didn't say like, wow, your session was so helpful. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. And that just, warms your heart, makes you feel good that you helped somebody else. And I met a ton of people through different public presentations that I built long-standing, personal and professional relationships with. So getting involved in community, whether it's presenting or put some posts out on LinkedIn that are your point, and I say LinkedIn rather than a blog today, that are your personal point of view about end user compute. Start posting on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. Just get your message out and get some feedback from people on what you could tune about it. And then just keep doing that, keep investing.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And, jumping back to what we were saying earlier about AI, me with my blog, I see a lot of copilot.microsoft.com traffic coming in. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, are people actually reading this content anymore? Or is it just being interpreted and then relayed to the user? And at the end of the day, it always gets into like really connecting with people, like you mentioned with LinkedIn or in person always being the biggest one. Because once you start doing the in-person stuff, that's when, connections become friends and turns into
at least if ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot is getting the information from your blog, at least the person's probably getting a correct answer as opposed to some random hallucination. So that's good.
I had a follow-up too about first-time presenters, because I know going into Bryform the first time, and I think they were 75-minute sessions.
Yeah.
And most of them are like 45-plus-minute sessions. So what are your thoughts on things like lightning sessions where they can get like a 15-minute kind of get your foot wet, nothing overbearing? What are your thoughts on those type of sessions?
So I think it depends on the type of person or the type of content they're presenting. I could tell you that the first few times I presented at Bryforum, I was panicked about 75 minutes. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to fill 75 minutes. I started adding like more slides with more information in my presentation. And then next thing I know, I got through like 15 or 20 slides in like 60 minutes. And I still had like 20 slides to go. And I was just like, oh God. So I would say 75 minutes or even 60 minutes is not as long as you would think, especially if you're open to the audience throwing in questions or comments. Or like it can lead you off in a direction that you burn 5 or 10 minutes before you even realize that it's happened. I would say if someone's never done a public presentation before, a lightning session is probably a great way for them to be able to get out there and try it without feeling like they've got to fill up an hour with information. But if you're doing a lightning session like that, you really should not prepare more than 1 or 2 slides for your 15 minutes because the time goes way faster than you would think. So if you're going to try a lightning session, 1 or 2 slides is it for 15 minutes, and you're going to fill it up, whether you think you will or not.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, right, the one thing I've noticed is, time flies once you get up on that stage. Like doing like V Brown Bag sessions at VMworld and Explorer, those are supposed to be 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how many blocks you take. And the next thing you know, it's done. Like, yeah. So, but to kind of build off that, right? You mentioned, if you haven't done a presentation before, a lightning session could be a good start. But, how do you think somebody should reach out and get help? Like, do you advocate first time speakers to get mentors or to, yes. To practice? And how would you coach them to make themselves more comfortable and more, I don't know if proficient's the right word, but I think that's the one that's kind of popping into my head.
So I would say there's no substitute for rehearsing your presentation multiple times, especially if it's your first time presenting. I'll tell you the mistake that a lot of first-time presenters make. They either put word for word everything they want to cover in their slide, which is what I did back in 2005, and then the audience is sitting there looking at a paragraph of text. And I did it because I didn't want to forget to say something important about a topic, but I learned really quickly that was the wrong way to convey the information because people were reading my slide rather than listening to me. So it took me a while to kind of change all of that. And one of the things that I did to get better at being more natural about speaking in a public presentation is I started putting more and more information into the notes of my slides, but specifically just putting like 2 or 3 words to jog my memory about a particular topic I wanted to talk about. And that 2 or 3 words might be a minute and a half of conversation, but just something to kind of like jog my memory as I'm going through the speaker notes. Now, that does occasionally backfire because sometimes you go up to a public presentation, you connect your laptop and you're looking for your speaker notes on the confidence monitor, and they're like, oh yeah, something's wrong. We're doing slide mirroring. And you're like, oh, I don't have any of my notes. And so it's maybe a good idea if it's your first time presenting something, actually to have a couple of note cards with those 2 or 3 words for each slide just to jog your memory so that you don't get up there and panic. Mm-hmm. But normally, if you know that you're going to have a speaker confidence monitor with your couple of words to guide you, use that. And I usually tell people you're so much better as a presenter if you're free form conversational speaking. So you're not trying to remember every word about every bullet point and whatever, because that comes off as awkward and you're reading from the confidence monitor. You want 2 or 3 notes to jog your memory, and then free form natural conversations if you were speaking to a friend about this topic sitting right across from you. And that usually comes across very well in a public presentation. But definitely seek out a mentor of someone who's done presentations before. I've probably done, 300 public presentations at this point. So I'm certainly happy to help anyone if they want to get some coaching or mentoring. Nothing is a good substitute, though, for practice. Do it in front of friends or family. Do it in front of a colleague that knows the space and can say, like, hey, you were good here, but you got a little twisted on your words here. It didn't come off very freely. That can give you good constructive feedback about it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in front of friends and family isn't the best audience because if they don't know the material, they're not going to be able to give you good feedback other than just saying like, you looked a bit panicked here, you tripped up on your words here, like that kind of stuff. But if you can find somebody in the space that you're in that can give you constructive criticism, that'd be very helpful. But definitely practice a bunch.
Yep. One thing just to add that too as well, I would add record yourself as also and watch.
Yes.
Because that'll help you as well if you stumble or you're timing, that kind of stuff.
There's nothing more embarrassing than listening to yourself after you do a public presentation. You realize how many times you said or whatever in between. The filler words are terrible.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add too is that through the world of EUC, reach out to one of the channels. We're also happy to connect you with mentors and some people to help you out as well. Go ahead, Shawn.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just don't do what I do, which like when I was at VMUGs, I'd be working on my deck as I'm walking up to plug my laptop in. Yeah, do not do that. So I think, I also like when I was at Nutanix.next in 2017, I was presenting with K's. We were going over our slide deck like an hour before we were presenting. That was our first time touching it.
This may be shocking to you, but at VMworld or VMware Explorer, as it was later known, almost every single EUC keynote, we were editing literally 5 or 10 minutes before we went on stage. Now, most of the time it was like, take this slide out. We didn't get the agreement to announce this partnership, whatever. It wasn't like major reconstruction, but there was one time we were editing it literally 2 minutes before Shankar was going out on stage. And I was like trying to copy the deck to the other USB drive to give it to the guys to drive the slides. And I was just like, oh, this is terrible. So.
Go ahead, Shawn.
Go ahead. I was turning it over to you. So.
Oh, okay. So one of the things we always like to ask our guests, and I know we probably asked you this in the past, is that outside of your day-to-day, so now you're at Citrix/Cloud Software Group, any interesting tech or non-tech things you're looking at?
Oh, interesting tech or non-tech things. I have been spending a lot of time in the AI space, not with any particular vendor, but just trying to get a much better command of AI. I would say I'm probably spending a lot of my time on that. Outside of that, I used to do a bunch of tech as a hobby. I did home theater PC stuff, but I reached a point a long time ago where the wife acceptance factor just wasn't there. And now every TV in my house has an Apple TV box with a bunch of apps and everyone's happier. The TV doesn't break. I don't get phone calls. The TV's broken. So I kind of left the home theater PC world behind. But I would say probably most of my time is spent on AI when I'm not working on end user compute.
I can relate to the Apple TV thing because I had the same thing here.
There were so many hours I poured into tweaking and tuning every aspect of my home theater PC setup. And I had like capabilities that most home theater apps and platforms still don't have today, but it was a labor of love, like hours and hours and hours every week. And it just didn't pay off.
I imagine, especially when you're traveling and you get that call and you're like on the other side of the world, 12-hour time difference. And it's like the TV's not working. The kids aren't happy.
The kids want to watch their Disney movie, and you have to break down sometimes and go, just go get the DVD from the basement and load it in the player. But yeah, it's labor of love, as I say.
As we wind things down, any additional comments or questions, Shawn? Steven?
Which Shawn is that directed to? Sorry.
Oh, Shawn Massey. Sorry.
No,
Shawn Massey.
No.
Mr. Wagner?
No, nothing to add.
Okay. Shawn, any closing thoughts before we close things down?
I just want to say thanks again for you guys having me on. I'm excited to be back on Frontline with you, and really excited for the future of World of EUC. I'm glad that you guys are picking up the torch and driving this and trying to really forge a community for end user compute, because I think it's still a very active community and one of the best communities I've ever been part of that really is very giving and supportive of folks in this industry. And it's wonderful to see you guys continuing to kind of push it along. So appreciate all your hard work on that.
Thank you. And congrats on the new position at Citrix / Cloud Software Group. Congrats on the 25 years. Congrats on the 15, Shawn Massey. So I can say it the right Shawn. So congrats. As we close things down, I just want to remind our listeners, like, subscribe, give us feedback. Also, too, don't forget to join the worldofeuc.org, where you can get information on our upcoming podcast, webinars, events, local events, any big news that comes out. So make sure you sign up there, join our Slack channel also to get the live community support. And as we close things out, I just want to say thank you again to Shawn. Thank you to our listeners for listening to the Frontline Chatter podcast, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.